back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. And shout out to everybody who's doing redraft drafts this weekend because they're happening. You and I have one, an on-site location draft, 14-team league with keepers. It's extremely sweaty in these redraft leagues. And right now we have camp news dropping every day. Seems like more of these guys are getting hyped up, whether it's the third string running back in Minnesota, whether it's Isaiah Pacheco, whether it's Tyler Algier, whether it's Kenny Pickett. There's just so much hype right now. But Alex, we need to put our flags. We need to plant our flags on these top tier names. So we're going to get into our fantasy football MVPs for 2022. These are guys that we like at or above ADP. They don't necessarily need to be late down the draft board values. These are just guys that we want on our fantasy teams that we think are going to produce. And when they hit, we're definitely going to be taking victory laps in the Discord. Alex, you ready to get into more of a segmented show today? Not as much of an open conversation back and forth, but just going through 6 players that we think are fantasy football MVPs.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's get to it. I think this is one we talk about a lot of players throughout the year, but this really is the chance, especially for redraft leagues and for dynasty leagues that we've been building up over time, to say, like, these are the players I need on my roster if I want to win a league, and where you can circle back at the end of the season and say, did we hit or did we miss? Last year, you hit on Jalen Hurts, which was awesome. I hit on Joe Mixon, which was great. I also, Laviska Shenault got me last year. I'll own up to that. He got me last year, but I'm going to be better this year. Learning from process in the past and seeing that forward into the future is what we got to do and what everyone's got to do moving forward. So, Steph, I'm excited to get into these MVPs. I'll let you kick it off with your first one. Who you got for us?
Yeah, and spoiler alert, there's going to be no tight end talk on today's show. No tight end MVPs this year. Of course, everyone loves Kelsey at the 1-2 turn, early second round in your 12-team leagues. Great, but yeah, this year the tight end landscape seems a little bit grosser than it usually is with Waller, with an injury in camp. Ertz has this camp injury with the calf. He hasn't been in camp at all. So we're staying away from tight ends this year. But you and I both have quarterbacks. And, Alex, if you remember back the very first season we did this show, we would do our starts of the week every single week during the season. And we had this old saying, right? We would go back to the well with guys where every single week we'd say, hey, Ryan Tannehill, it's a great streamer this week. I'm going to go back to the well. He's another start of the week for me. I'm doing it on a season-over-season basis this time because I'm going back to the well with my boy Jalen Hurts. Right now, his ADP is QB6, going right behind Kyler, right ahead of Joe Burrow. And in my rankings and where I'm drafting him over Kyler Murray this season. Wow. Okay, the Eagles last year were dead last in pass attempts, and Jalen Hurts finishes the QB6 on the year. He was the QB1 in fantasy football through the first 11 weeks of the season before he had a high ankle sprain in Week 12 against the Giants. And if you look at his rushing capability, obviously everyone knows about the Konami code, the rushing cheat code for fantasy quarterbacks. Over 50% of the top 12 quarterbacks in fantasy scoring since 2018 have gotten at least 20% of their fantasy points from rushing statistics. So you need a guy that's putting up at least 20%, ideally more in that 30, 40, 50% rushing statistic. That's why we love Trey Lance this year. We were all over Lamar Jackson in years past, but even guys like Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott historically, where they can give you that 300-plus rushing yards on the ground. Hurts gives you 784 rushing yards in 2021. I'm expecting improvement in that this year, even though they might be a little bit more pass heavy. I'll talk about the new weaponry in Philly in a moment, but we're second in the league with 9 rush attempts per game, 10 rushing touchdowns, number 1 in the league in rushing touchdowns at the quarterback position. And Hurts is a phenomenal rusher. He can truck guys at 6'1", 222 pounds. He's somewhere physically between the Lamar Jackson, more slender, but juke you out of your shoes, and the Josh Allen. Like, I'm just going to truck guys somewhere in between there. But through the air, 3,100, just over 3,100 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Nothing to write home about, nothing insane, but did have some big games where his passing numbers, granted, more upside. He threw over 250 yards in 4 games last year against Atlanta, Dallas, Kansas City, and Washington. So you could look ahead and say, hey, these are easy defenses, or these are shootout game scripts against Dallas, against Kansas City. where Hurts is going to need to air it out, and he did just that. His 26 total touchdowns, where you combine his rushing touchdowns and passing touchdowns, means he was 14th in total touchdowns last year, and I expect that to go up because the Eagles traded their 2022 first-round pick and a third-round pick for A.J. Brown, Arthur Juan Brown from the Tennessee Titans, superstar, stud, Alpha X, and the Eagles also wanted to beef up their offensive line a little bit. They come into 2022 with PFF's #1 graded offensive line. They have some of the best tackle play in the league. They added second-round center Cam Jurgens in the draft. And then you look beyond just the O-line improvements and the A.J. Brown trade. You have Devonta Smith coming into year 2, over 900 yards as a rookie. No one seems to talk about that because Jamar Chase was so dominant. Okay, and Dallas Goedert, one of the premier tight end receiving tight ends in the league. He was 5th in receiving yards at the tight end position with over 800. And I really like the offense as a whole in Philly. They were top 12 in pace of play, but they're now coming into year 2 in Nick Sirianni's system, and they're my pick for the NFC East right now over the Dallas Cowboys, over the Giants. That's not a hot take, and over the Washington Commanders, who have been terrible. So Eagles, easy playoff team for me like they were last year. And for Hurts, there were only 6 games in 2021 where he was below 20 fantasy points in a 4-point per touchdown passing touchdown league. I think he truly does have QB1 overall upside if things break the Eagles' way. And the Eagles have shown us they're willing to use him however they're going to maximize Hurts, whether it's, hey, we're just going to run the ball 15-plus times with Hurts and spread the ball out amongst our running backs and just ground and pound through these games, or, hey, we need to air it out to keep up with the Chiefs of the world. So I'm all in on Hurts again. Draft him in all, whether single QB, super flex, get him on your roster in 2022.
Wow. I mean, that's a convincing argument right there, Steph. And I love Hurts as well. I love the pick. Looking over your picks on our show sheet, like I am in agreement with you on all 3. And I know you like a couple of my guys as well. And it was just kind of figuring out who's going to talk about who today. So I love that we are in such agreement on today's show. If you want to see us disagree, go back over the last couple shows and we get into some pretty good debates there. But Steph, I think I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to go straight to my quarterback because you just talked about Jalen Hurts. I want to keep the quarterback talk going because I love targeting Jalen Hurts where he's going right now in drafts. And if I don't get Hurts, if I miss out, if some savvy player like yourself takes him right in front of me in one of my leagues, I'm going to wait a round or 2 and take Russell Wilson. Right now, his ADP is honestly just insane to me. He's going as QB 10 in the back of the 7th round. And Russell Wilson is a player that has the upside with his efficiency to be the overall quarterback 1 this year. I know you said Jalen Hurts has that upside. I think Russell Wilson has it as well, not as much with the upside in the rushing ability, but the upside with the touchdown totals. So Russell Wilson has finished as a top 9 fantasy quarterbacks for 8 straight seasons before the injury-riddled season in 2021. So the floor he's giving you is incredibly solid, from his entire sample size of his full career with Seattle. Now, obviously, he's with the Denver Broncos and an offense that should be, honestly, as good, if not better, than what we saw in Seattle over his entire career. Not only is he going to get the reins to the offense with Nathaniel Hackett coming over as the head coach, and we see Hackett typically let his quarterback dictate the pace of play. So Russell Wilson as a guy who we've heard this let Russ cook narrative for years and years and years. We saw a glimpse of it one time in 2020, but now in 2022, I fully expect Russell Wilson to be over 600 attempts for the first time in his career. His current career high is 558. And back in 2017, when he was the quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football, he had 553 pass attempts. So I think with 600 attempts, with Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, and Albert O as your receiving weapons, then you've got Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams as capable pass catchers out of the backfield with an offensive line that's much better than what he had in Seattle. I don't think there's anything not to like about Russell Wilson in this Denver Broncos offense. They're also in the AFC West, which gives you shootout potential with 2 games during the season against the Chiefs, against the Raiders, against the Los Angeles Chargers. So we love that as well. And we could see Russell Wilson have some of these games where he's putting up 40, 45, maybe even 50 pass attempts. And I mentioned the 2020 season. So that's the season when we finally got to start to see Russell Wilson air it out for the first half of the season, and things kind of tapered off over the second half. And in that season, he was quarterback 2 in points per game over the first 8 games of the season. He was on pace for 594 attempts. So that's the only 8-game sample size we've seen Russell Wilson be close to the 600 attempt number. And he was the quarterback 2, averaging over 29 fantasy points per game. From week 10 on that season, they really tapered things back. They focused on the running game. He moved to 520 attempt pace, and he was the quarterback 12 over that span. So with Russell Wilson in Denver, the big narrative here is not only the change in team and the change of scenery, but really the ability to air the ball out and just have the volume we want to see from Russell Wilson, because he's been an incredibly efficient quarterback over his career. 6.2% touchdown rate in his career, 3rd highest of all time, 4th highest passer rating of all time, top 10 all time in yards per attempt, adjusted net yards per attempt, and he's tied for the most fourth quarter comebacks and game-winning drives since 2012 when he came into the league. So we know he's an elite quarterback. We know he's an efficient quarterback, but now add some volume on top of that, and we could see him go absolutely nuclear this season. And I do have to add, with the rushing floor, no, he's not a Jalen Hurts, but he's better than some of these pocket passers, these Tom Brady's, Matt Staffords, who aren't giving you anything, because he's averaged 450-plus rushing yards in his career. And I know over the past couple seasons, as he's gotten older, that's tapered back a little bit. But before last season's injury-riddled season, he had 4 straight seasons with over 340 rushing yards. So he's my MVP pick heading into the season. And I think that's going to translate in a big way in fantasy football as well. So I want as much investment in Russell Wilson and this Denver Broncos team as possible in 2022.
Alex, Broncos Nation, let's ride, because I love the takes on Russ. I have him over Dak, which is contrary to ADP right now. So both of us are willing to put the lower name and perceived ADP over the guy who's right next to them in ADP. Love that you threw Russell Wilson out there as a guy with QB1 overall potential, because we've seen that from him before. And this leads me right into my fantasy MVP in our boy Courtland Sutton, going as a wide receiver 16 right now. And the stars have aligned for Sutton with Russ joining this Broncos offense. He talked about his efficiency metrics, his touchdown percentage. We've also seen Russell Wilson, as recent as 2020, support 2 wide receiver 1s in fantasy football. Both DK and Lockett were top 12 in fantasy points per game in 2020. So we know that support for the receiver weapon, whoever his wide receiver 1 is there when the volume is there with them as well. And he was able to support wide receiver 1 seasons from 2 receivers on that notoriously low volume and horrible, run first, play good defense mentality from Pete Carroll. And now he enters a situation, Russ does, where the offensive line, this is the best offensive line I think he's going to have in his entirety. Okay, and we should see the pass volume and the pace of play skyrocket compared to what it has been in Seattle last year. The Broncos were 28th in pace of play with Teddy Bridgewater. We can almost guarantee that's going to go up. But the thing for me on Sutton is that we know he's good. Okay, I know last year was a down year. I'll talk about that here in a second. But at 6'3", 218 pounds, runs a 4.5, has exceptional athleticism based on his combine metrics, his vertical, broad jump, shuttle. He was an early second-round pick and already got the contract extension. He's off his rookie deal, and now a trusted veteran in the league. He got a 4-year, $61 million deal through the 2025 season. And even as a rookie, with Case Keenum throwing the ball in Denver, he had 700 receiving yards. Then had the big monster breakout year with over 1,100 receiving yards, a 26% target share. That's top 10 in the league. That's alpha wide receiver 1 level target share. And that was with Drew Lock, Joe Flacco, and Brandon Allen throwing the ball in Denver. Okay, where he was a fantasy wide receiver 2. So he was already seeing that Allen Robinson type treatment where we know he's good. He's playing that outside X role. The touchdowns are coming in. The efficiency's there. He's getting the deep targets, but he's also creating yards after the catch. The quarterback play was just brutal. Okay, and then year 3, unfortunately, tears the ACL. The whole year's a wash. And then coming into year 4 in 2021, Sutton struggled a little bit. All right, coming back from the ACL, then you had Teddy Bridgewater with the low volume, the low pace of play, the low efficiency on especially deep targets from Teddy. But from weeks 2 to 7, when Jerry Jeudy was out of the lineup with the high ankle sprain, Sutton was the wide receiver 10. And I think that's closer to where he can be this year, if not much higher now with Russell Wilson in the offense. And there's no guarantee that Jerry Jeudy is that dude that the Broncos thought he was when they took him in the first round. And even last year, Sutton was top 10 in air yards, top 10 in deep targets, number 2 in average depth of target, and 5th in unrealized air yards. So you take this perfect skill match between Russell Wilson's efficiency, especially throwing the ball deep, his willingness to throw the ball deep, and Courtland Sutton and his abilities. And that's a stack I want everywhere in redraft, in best ball, and even in dynasty leagues where I have multiple shares. So I'm all in, thanks to Russell Wilson, on Courtland Sutton this year because the stars have finally aligned.
Hey, I mean, if Russell Wilson's going to be that dude, Courtland Sutton's probably got to be that dude too, and vice versa. So I love the chemistry there between our fantasy MVPs, both of us putting our eggs in that Broncos basket. And I think they're going to be fantastic this season. But Steph, I'm going to move on to my first wide receiver pick as a fantasy MVP, keeping it in this shootout potential AFC West. I think there's so many people that are excited about this division as a whole because of the kind of upside weeks that it can provide. And with that being said, I'm going with an upside wide receiver in Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. And depending on where you look, his ADP can be anywhere from mid-3rd round. In some places, it's like mid-5th, even into the 6th round, which is just egregious.
Oh, boy.
But his platform consensus ADP, so Fantasy Pros has kind of like a weighted average across all different platforms, depending on where you're playing. And he's at wide receiver 19 right now at the 4-5 turn. So that is an incredible value on Mike Williams, who was the PPR wide receiver 12 last season in just 16 games. He missed a game and even left the game early with injury. So Mike Williams not only was fantastic last season, but all the indicators heading into 22 are that he is going to repeat, if not be even better this season with Justin Herbert. He just got paid. He was a free agent this offseason, had the chance to leave, had other teams interested, and LA said, no, we need you with Justin Herbert. We're going to pay you with a 3-year, $60 million extension. Pretty good money for Mike Williams at the receiver position. And we forget sometimes that, it took him a little while to have the huge breakout season, but he was a 6'4", 220-pound monster drafted 7th overall in 2017. So this is a elite prospect coming into the NFL. Previously in his career, had a 10-touchdown season. On a separate season, was over 1,000 yards. And we always said, what if he could put together the touchdowns and the yardage and kind of bring it full circle? And what Justin Herbert did that last season with 9 touchdowns and over 1,100 yards. So the reason I love Mike Williams is he just has that top 5 wide receiver upside. If I'm drafting someone in the 4th round at the receiver spot, I want someone on a good offense that could be a top 5 receiver. I don't want to play it safe with that pick. I'm going to shoot for the stars with that pick. And I think Mike Williams is the ability to do that. Not only is he on a pass-friendly offense, like I mentioned, Herbert was 2nd in the NFL in attempts last season, but Mike Williams is the red zone target and the deep target on this team. Keenan Allen is this possession guy, a great PPR receiver in his own right, but Mike Williams is the one that you want in fantasy because he gets those big plays. We talk about wanting these valuable touches for running backs, which are usually receptions, their red zone and goal line carries. Well, in the same way, we want valuable targets for wide receivers. These are downfield targets. These are red zone targets. And Mike Williams was 12th in deep targets last season and 8th in red zone targets. So in terms of these high value targets for the receiver position, Mike Williams is getting those, and he had 129 targets last year, a career high. No reason to think that's going to come down heading into 2022 either. And what's more interesting is the ability for him to improve. We look at the 9 touchdowns last season, good, but not even great for what Mike Williams can do. He actually underperformed in his touchdowns last season versus expectation. And sometimes touchdowns can be fluky. There can be penalties. There can be missed penalties. There can be all sorts of stuff that happens. But he had 19 red zone targets last season and only 4 red zone touchdowns. For reference, DK Metcalf had the same amount of red zone targets, but had 9 touchdowns instead of 4. And Mike Evans had 18 red zone targets and had 9 touchdowns instead of 4. So if Mike Williams can continue to get the volume of these targets in the red zone, which I expect him to do, especially with Jared Cook gone now as well, he should have more than 4 red zone touchdowns this year if he can continue to get close to 20 targets in that area. So he could be one of these guys that dominates the catch point, ends up with 12 touchdowns this year, and with over 15 yards per catch. last season and over the course of his career, he could be one of these players where at the end of the season we're looking at it and saying, holy smokes, Mike Williams was a 12-touchdown, 1,500-plus yard guy. That's really what I think his upside could be in 2022. So, I mean, I've demonstrated the upside and the value of these targets, and some people are going to say Mike Williams is super boom bust. To an extent, yes, he did have some disappointing games in 2021, but most of these top receivers do. And Mike Williams truly is a week winner, and that's what I want on these teams. I'm not playing for second. I'm not playing for third. I'm trying to win my league. And if you look at last season, Mike Williams had finishes of wide receiver 14 on the week, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 2, and wide receiver 1. So he is someone that can go out, post 10 for 150 and 2, hands down win you a week, win you a fantasy championship. And so Mike Williams is someone I'm going to be drafting early and often in 2022.
I love it. I love it. And I'm going to throw a hot take out there. I think Mike Williams outperforms Keenan Allen this year in fantasy points per game.
I would take him over Keenan Allen, absolutely.
Which makes Mike Williams a name that I'm willing to take in the late third round, depending on my roster build. If he's kind of the last guy that's there before you start to hit some of the, Brandon Cooks, Juju Smith-Schuster, DK Metcalf range. Love going Mike Williams just to have a guy that I can rely on to win me weeks. And I think that's really what you're saying here with Mike Williams. And one other thing on Mike Williams, where you said he had some room to improve in the touchdown category, I think he has room to improve in the target share category as well. A 20.8% target share last year, was 14th in targets, but 34th in target share. If Keenan Allen in an age 30 season starts to decline or take a step back, there's nothing but runway there for Mike Williams. But Alex, I want to keep it in Los Angeles, okay, the battle for LA, if you will. But I'm going to move to the running back position. And if anyone's been rocking with us in the Discord, if you've heard our takes on Dynasty Leagues, you should not be surprised by the name that I'm going to flag plant on, because I've been doing it all offseason, all year, saying he's a buy everywhere last year. And it's Cam Akers. Cam Akers right now going off the board, RB19. To me, he is an easy smash in the fourth round of your 12-team PPR redraft leagues because of the upside that he presents. Just like you're talking about with Mike Williams, guys like David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, even J.K. Dobbins don't have a ceiling like Cam Akers does, and that's the names where he's going around one spot below Breece Hall, one spot above A.J. Dillon. So I love taking him at ADP, and sometimes I'm willing to take him over a Breece Hall, depending on who my other RB1 is, or if I'm doing a hero RB type of build. But anytime you bring up Akers, what you have to jump right into is the Achilles concerns. Everyone wants to write this guy off because Achilles tears over the last 20 years are career enders for running backs. And my pushback on that is, if you want to bring that up, that's fine. Okay? I'm not going to say it's not a concern at all. But you're falling into a small sample size trap. I'll throw a graphic on the screen now. Only 13 running backs since 2010 have suffered Achilles tears. Okay, all were bad or average running backs, except for Arian Foster, who at the time of his Achilles tear was 29 years old, 4 years past the age apex. Okay, and we've seen players outside of the running back position like Demaryius Thomas, rest in peace, Terrell Suggs, return from Achilles ruptures and have elite seasons, Pro Bowl seasons, Hall of Fame caliber type seasons. And if you're fading Akers because of this Achilles repair, you're doing it because of a very small sample size. No one wants to talk about Dante Foreman last year having a career year in yards per attempt coming off an Achilles. If you include his big playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals, we've had Olympic gymnasts coming back for Tokyo 2021 to win gold 3 months after the Achilles tear. The way they're doing these Achilles repairs now is a completely different surgery. And the Rams actually went out and got the LA surgeon who did the Kobe Bryant Achilles repair on Cam Akers. And he came back less than 6 months after the injury happened to play. Now, I know he wasn't super efficient. I'll address that later. But we have James Robinson right now, team saying he's going to be ready and active for week 1. And that's 7 months after his Achilles rupture. So it's not necessarily a one-off thing. Hey, this is the first guy ever to have this type of repair done on his Achilles. And if you want to talk about this, hey, when he came back, he looked bad or he had horrible efficiency if you just look at his yards per attempt. And I think that's another small sample size trap. Only 20% of snaps he was even on the field in his first game back in week 18. So that's clearly, hey, let's just see if he's still, in game shape coming off this long injury recovery. And then 3 of those 4 games, he was against the top defenses in the league because they're in the playoffs. They're playing stout defenses. They're playing Tampa Bay, who's notorious for run stopping. They're playing the Bengals, who came on strong on the defensive side of the ball down the stretch last year. They had San Francisco's insane front 7 to compete with. So I'm not going to overreact. And also Arizona, who they played with J.J. Watt, with Chandler Jones. Okay, and I went back and watched every snap from Akers. I think he still has juice. He broke off an amazing-looking 14-yard run against San Francisco, had a 17 and a 15-yard run against Arizona, caught a 14-yard screen pass. He jukes a guy out of his shoes, gets upfield, and a 40-yard reception on a trick play. So, one, I think that Akers is an exceptional receiver, but even if the efficiency continues to be a problem, what we've seen from Sean McVay is that he always relies on a primary back. I know there's the talk right now in camp that, hey, that we're going to split the backfield between Akers and Henderson. That's fine. No one seems to be fading Javonte Williams with Melvin Gordon being there, and Melvin Gordon's better than Darrell Henderson. So even if that is the case, right, and I give you that one, right, for these Akers haters, Akers is still a guy I want at ADP because Henderson last year was RB14 through the first 12 weeks of the season. And you and I, we've talked about him in Dynasty. Like, he's not like some exceptional world-beating talent. We saw Todd Gurley in the years prior before he went to Atlanta, him just being the 80% plus opportunity share type of guy. And that's exactly what Cam Akers was in the highest stages of football last year, in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl, a 75% carry share, an 80% opportunity share in the postseason with Sony Michel active. That's Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris level of usage that the coaches gave him after an Achilles tear. And even when Darrell Henderson came back healthy for the Super Bowl, Akers 13 carries to Henderson's 4, and both caught the same amount of receptions. And even if you're big on Henderson, I think he's fine at ADP. But when Akers went down, they went out and signed Sony Michel. They weren't ready to give Darrell Henderson all this volume. And they gave Sony Michel over 200 carries and 30 targets. Not to mention they drafted Cam Akers when Darrell Henderson was already on the roster. So to me, they've signaled that they clearly don't want Henderson to ever be the guy they're relying on in the run game in LA. And then you look at the situation. It's year 2, Matt Stafford, Super Bowl winning offense in LA. They've added Allen Robinson to help move the ball downfield on the outside and essentially replace some of that production from Robert Woods leaving the team. And even if the defense, which added Bobby Wagner, is carrying LA defensively, I think Akers is still going to be that guy who's getting 17-plus carries a game, grinding out the clock. The offensive line last year finished 7th per PFF. I know Andrew Whitworth retired, but Joe Noteboom has been great when he's been on the field, so they're just going to slot in a young, exciting offensive line piece into that front in LA. So you get a young, exciting running back with draft capital who showed explosiveness, who showed a versatile skill set. You put him in a good offense. He has a track record of commanding volume when healthy. You get the injury discount. I do believe he has RB1 upside in fantasy points per game. The main risk is the health, not the coach speak and not Darrell Henderson.
My goodness. I mean, you went in there.
I'm going to go down with the ship.
It's basically a research paper on Cam Akers. And when we're talking about analyzing gymnasts for the Olympics for these Achilles repairs, that's how you know that big baby Stef over here has done his research. So he's not just making stuff up. Like, you have done your research more than anyone I know on this topic. And the truth is, like, I did an underdog draft this morning, and Cam Akers went late 5th round. I was like, that is insane. And when you talk about the late 5th round, I'm torn on Akers. I don't know if I have the guts to do it. But the truth is, the players you are drafting in that round do not have the upside that Akers has. And if Akers hits and he is the player he was before, he will be a top 10 running back, no doubt. Worst case scenario, I still think he's going to have value. Like, I don't think there's a scenario where he's just like a backup getting 5 carries a game. Like, worst case scenario, he's splitting. Maybe he's a little bit inefficient, but he still could give you the same value as a Damian Harris, right? So, like, it's not like you're risking the farm and not getting anything out of Akers if he doesn't hit and he's not the player he was before. So the risk reward does favor the upside over the downside. So I love the pick. But Steph, I don't quite have the research paper that you had on my last fantasy MVP, but this is someone I've loved all offseason. I want to get all the shares I can. I'm always trying to accumulate more. And he has been a little bit polarizing as well. And it's Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones for the Green Bay Packers. And this is a tough one because a lot of change in Green Bay, new coaching staff with the offensive coordinator there. And then obviously LaFleur is still there as the head coach, and he was really ramping up A.J. Dillon last season along with Aaron Jones. Devontae Adams is gone now with the Las Vegas Raiders. Aaron Rodgers decided to come back. So a lot of change just around the organization with the personnel, with some of the coaches, all sorts of things. And people are fading Aaron Jones because of A.J. Dillon. And that's the biggest counter I'm seeing to Aaron Jones right now. But Steph, I absolutely love Aaron Jones right now at his current ADP. And because there's some of this concern, he's going as the RB11 in the back of the second round. And people feel like the end of his 2021 season was disappointing, but he still finished as the PPR running back 10 last season with A.J. Dillon emerging. So in the two prior seasons that he was RB5 and RB2. So like we've seen Aaron Jones be this top 5 running back that gives you touchdown upside, that gives you receiving upside in the past. And I honestly love A.J. Dillon as well, along with this take for Aaron Jones. I don't think me loving Aaron Jones in the back of the second round means A.J. Dillon's not going to be great this season, because I genuinely believe with Devontae Adams leaving, they are going to utilize both running backs. And I think this offense is going to revolve around Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon instead of revolving around Devontae Adams. I think it's going to look a little bit different in 2022. We've seen samples in the past when Adams was out, when it did revolve around Dillon and Jones, and it was phenomenal for both guys. So when we look at Aaron Jones as a player, we know his receiving skill set is off the charts. I mean, 47 or more receptions in each of his past 3 seasons, and in those seasons also 10 or more touchdowns. So this is a guy who gets those high value touches at the running back spot in the red zone through the receiving game. And even if Dillon does eat into more goal line work this season, I don't necessarily think that means Aaron Jones can't be a 10, a 15 touchdown player, because he still is going to get some work on the ground at the goal line and get some rushing touchdowns. But I think Aaron Jones is going to step up in a tremendous way in the passing game. And that gets me to honestly my main point is like Aaron Jones, I think as a receiver, is going to be phenomenal in 2022 and is a must draft in PPR leagues. Because if we look at some of Aaron Jones's biggest career games over these past 3 seasons when he's broken out, they've been because of his receiving production. Like when Aaron Jones has a huge receiving game, that's what has led him to fantasy success. I mean, listen to some of these games he's had over the past several years. He's had 6 for 48 and 3 reception touchdowns in one game. He's had games with 7 for 51 on 11 targets, 4 for 68 in a touchdown, 6 for 58, 7 for 75. I love this one, 7 receptions, 159 and 2 touchdowns through the air. So like for all intents and purposes, Aaron Jones is like kind of a hybrid running back and wide receiver, this slot utility guy that Aaron Rodgers loves to utilize and that Aaron Rodgers trusts. And I think they're going to lean into that piece of Aaron Jones's skill set in 2022, which I think raises his value even more than it was in the past if he was getting 200, 250 carries. So right now the Packers have 240 vacated targets. I expect Aaron Jones to step up and see a huge portion of those targets. We're already hearing Aaron Rodgers, get frustrated with some of these rookie wide receivers. 240 targets. I know they brought in Romeo Doubs, who's looked great. They have Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, but like 240 targets are not going to those 3 players. I think Aaron Jones is going to step up and have well over 100 targets this season. I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Jones got close to 100 receptions in 2022, which I know is a bit of a hot take. But if he ends up with 80, 90 receptions and 10, 12 touchdowns in 2022, he's going to finish as a top 5 running back again. And you are just not getting that kind of value in the back of the second round. Like I'll take Aaron Jones over the Leonard Fournettes of the world. I'll take him over a Javonte Williams. I'll take him over some of the question marks with Saquon Barkley all day long, because those are some of the guys at his ADP. I just love the outlook and the guaranteed production you're going to get from him in the receiving game. And he's done it for 3 years in a row. So there's not a lot not to like, except maybe A.J. Dillon if you want to take the shot on him several rounds later. But for me, Steph, I'm all in on Aaron Jones. I see the value through the receiving game, and I'm not going to pay attention to Dillon versus Jones, because to me, both of these guys can thrive in an offense that has a huge Devontae Adams size hole, and they're going to be needing these key cornerstone pieces for this offense and Aaron Rodgers in 2022.
I think you nailed it, hit it out of the park. And I love Aaron Jones, like prior to them really saying like Kamara's not going to face the suspension, I had Aaron Jones firmly over Kamara. Might still take him over Kamara right now, just with some of the concerns in New Orleans, and there could still be a suspension late in the year. But if you look at Green Bay's receiving room, it's brutal. And this just gives me flashbacks to the situation that Detroit was in last year where DeAndre Swift was the RB8 in fantasy points per game because he's a guy who's efficient as a receiver. He's going to command volume as a receiver. The receiving weapons, like the actual wide receivers themselves, are nothing to write home about. We're hoping for big things from Allen Lazard. That's purely a projection. They brought in 2 project, small school rookie wide receivers. They brought Randall Cobb back, who's on the descending side of his career. Same with Sammy Watkins. And then it's like Amari Rodgers, who had like less than 30 snaps last year. Travis Fulgham, shout out to Travis Fulgham on the Eagles for like 3 weeks, 2 years ago. It's just so disgusting in the receiver room. And then Robert Tunyon's coming in hurt. It's Josiah DeGuara at starting at tight end. Like, they have to rely on Aaron Jones, and this is just, to me, so reminiscent of what Swift did. But I think Jones is better than Swift because he's been in the league a lot longer. He's shown those explosive plays. There's nothing that we've seen to show us that Jones is slowing down, other than the fact that he is older than 25 years old, sitting at 27 right now. But that's not going to stop me from drafting him in a redraft league under any circumstance. So, Alex, I love the take there on Aaron Jones, going at RB11 right now. But, guys, let us know what you think down in the comments below. We got Jalen Hurts, Russell Wilson, Courtland Sutton, Mike Williams, Cam Akers, and Aaron Jones. Akers is the one that could hurt us here. That could be this year's LaVisca, but let us know what you all think in the comments down below. If you like what we do here on the channel, like and a sub greatly appreciated. Continue rocking with us in the free Discord link down below. And we'll see y'all next time. Peace.